Hi everyone, this is Grace and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to learn how to decorate this mostly beginner, nothing better than sweater weather set. And these are the beginner part of this set, the mitten, sweater, and mug. So first up we have the mug. I am doing a one consistency outline and flood for this main part of the mug. I do think for the most part that a single consistency is easier for beginners to apply. Now I would recommend not flooding all the way to the edge like I have done here. I would flood with a few millimeters of a border and then use your scribe to encourage it to the edge. A single consistency is a bit harder to make though, because it is this perfect balance of thin enough that it will dry flat, but thick enough that it's not going to just fall over the edge. For me, I hold the spoon up above the bowl and it will just fall off the spoon in a trickle, just barely. Right here, I am spritzing some edible glitter by the Sugar Art. Big fan, I'll link it in the description. For the snowflake here, I'm actually doing a transfer, and that means that I am piping the design on top of a food grade cellophane bag, and I will allow this to dry, peel this off, and then apply this to the cookie. You can also absolutely just pipe the snowflake onto the dried mug, but I wanted to do something a little bit different here. This is just an image that I found on the internet, printed it out, put a cellophane bag on top, traced it with my piping bag with a medium peak piping consistency. This is medium peak again, and just using some Wilton sprinkles, nothing fancy here. I have allowed that main part of the mug to sufficiently crust over, and now I'm piping the handle separate. You could always pipe the handle when you pipe the body, but I wanted there to be definition in between the handle and the body of the mug, which is why I decided to do them separately. I'm gonna let that handle dry, and now I am applying the snowflake. There's a balance of how much icing to use so that it adheres, but not so much that when you press it down, it actually smushes through the transfer. I prefer to apply transfers when the base flood is dry. You can apply transfers when the base flood is wet, but I tried that with this and the blue actually bled through the white snowflake, so I didn't want that to happen, which is why I decided to do it dry like this. And now in a second, you're going to see that I actually, cracked the snowflake. I just wanted you to see that how easy this one was to crack. So that was the mug, and up next we have the mitten. For this one, we are doing a wet on wet design, and again, I have done a single consistency, outline and flood. Again, I would recommend not flooding all the way to the edge. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. I just am very comfortable with icing and knowing how much pressure to apply in my bag versus how thick my icing is that day. So do yourself a favor. Don't flood out all the way to the edge. And again, my thicker flood, which is what I call this, just barely falls off the spoon when I pick the spoon up from the bowl, just barely in a trickle. So this is on the thick side. I'm just shaking this a little bit so that it flattens out a bit. And now I'm moving immediately to pipe these dots. This is the same thickness, a thicker flood in the white. This is a really simple technique, but it can be kind of hard because you do need to move pretty quickly before that green crusts over. So now I have let the green crust, and I'm just piping here this little floof. There's not a super rhyme or reason to my dots here. You can connect the floofs. I think I just made that word up, floof, but that's okay. It's just a little poof, fluff, not foof, fluff at the end. And that was some more diamond dust that I just spritzed on there. Gotta love some edible glitter. And then we have the sweater here. This is going to be another wet on wet design. This time we'll use a scribe, getting a little fancy here, and I'm flooding this in sections. What that means is I am doing alternate sections. I will allow this center body to crust, then I'll do the arms, and that's because I want there to be definition in between the center of the sweater and the arms. And you'll see here that I am under flooding a bit because I'm going to be adding a decent amount of icing on top of the white for the wet and wet design. And logically, right, I'm adding more icing to the surface. So if I already have too much icing and I'm adding even more, then it's just going to want to fall over the edge of the cookie, and we don't want that. So underflood a little bit, use your scribe to help it even out. Here, I'm pulling my scribe through and I'm cleaning it off after every pull, and that's because I don't want to see the start of the pull. If you don't clean your scribe off, you'll see in that white the start of the pull with some green icing in it. And again, I was just shaking it there because it was a little on the thick side and needed some encouragement. So here I am piping the arm, same idea as the center of the sweater. And I'm going to, let's see, attempt to underflood just a little bit. Maybe not as well this time, but that's okay. And going in with my blue just to alternate for fun. I am moving pretty quickly here, and that's very important, as I mentioned before, with wet on wet, so that it doesn't crust. This is one of the very first technique designs that I ever learned, was wet on wet, doing polka dots and doing just a simple stripe here with the scribe pull. If you want to challenge yourself, you could do even more stripes than I did. I did a version of this just for fun where I think I had twice the number of stripes and I alternated colors with the green and the blue, just for a little something extra. It's more challenging because you just have to work even faster because you're applying even more icing with the wet on wet design. So there, my white got pulled just a little too much, so the surface of the cookie was coming through, and that's an easy fix. I just saw it, so I used my scribe to kind of help the icing just settle in. That was on the right arm of the sweater, doing a little jiggle to help it settle. I've allowed that sweater to crust over, and now I am doing just the final detail. This is a medium peak, and it's just a super easy zigzag. I do this zigzag a lot in different applications. It's just really easy. It's a back and forth motion with a consistent amount of pressure. So that is the sweater. And then the not so beginner part of the set, but I just love a good punny cookie, is this plaque cookie that will say nothing better than sweater weather. So this plaque here, one of my favorite plaques ever. It's the Nancy from Kaleidocuts. I will link it in the description of the video. I did do a 2 consistency outline and flood. It was a large cookie. I tend to prefer to do 2 consistencies if I'm doing a large cookie. So that's why I decided to do that. I was also using white in piping consistency for the rest of the set. So I was already making it. Why not also outline this larger cookie? So flooding here, I'm a pretty methodical flooder, as you can see, pretty precise. And then I will allow that to pretty well crust. I want to have a dry enough surface that I'm not going to poke through it as I'm piping this lettering. This is called pressure piping lettering, and that means that I am adjusting the pressure on my bag. This is probably the hardest kind of lettering to do. Well, they're all hard in their own way, but this is hard because you're adjusting the amount of pressure that you're applying on the bag as you're piping. So the downstrokes get more pressure. and then you release the pressure on the upstrokes, but you still have to apply enough pressure that you're going to get icing out of the bag, because if you just completely release pressure, not enough icing is going to come out of the bag because you're doing a piping consistency here. My lettering consistency is a soft peak. So for me, that means I put my spoon in the bowl of icing, take it out, pull it upright, and a stiff peak will stand all the way up. A medium peak will begin to fold over, but still very much hold its shape. And a soft peak completely folds over, but still maintains the integrity of that little peak that has fallen, if that makes sense. And what soft peak does is it's this beautiful balance of thick enough, obviously, that it's going to maintain the integrity of the lines on top of lines. So you have distinct shape and lines in your lettering. You can see here like that B where I'm crossing over. But it is thin enough that, especially if you use a scribe on it, it will smooth out. So you get this beautiful smooth lettering. I did not use a scribe on my lettering here. If you've watched enough of my videos, you would know that I only have so much patience, and generally my patience stops at using a scribe on letters. Very, very rarely will I do that. I guess I just don't think it's worth it. Personally, I think it's good enough. I do think that lettering consistency is the hardest consistency to get right. I don't always get it right. I do think, if anything, it's better to be a little too thick than too thin, because there's nothing worse than piping out beautiful letters and then they just kind of melt into a pool into each other. Sad day, sad day. This lettering here was actually done custom by Bossy Brushstrokes on Instagram. She's awesome, Elena. I wanted this lettering to specifically match this cutter, and I'm a big fan. Although this is a lot of letters, I would not recommend tackling, especially if you're a beginner, tackling something like this with this many letters. Too many letters. Just like sweater weather would have been great, but I guess I was an overachiever. That's fine. It's a cute cookie. I'm happy. So there we have the Nothing Better Than Sweater Weather plaque. The last few accents. Et voila. And that, my friends, is the Nothing Better Than Sweater Weather mostly beginner set. Have fun making it yourself.